What's the difference between an MD and a PhD? I'm just throwing it out there.
There's a huge difference. In fact, when I was in graduate school, I helped tutor and teach MDs the cellular and molecular biology. And by and large, they are not familiar with how these biologics are developed and how that technology works. And so that's why PhDs are hesitant. African Americans are hesitant because they're one of actually several marginalized groups that have basically been experimented on. Stanley Plotkin in the Plotkin deposition actually went on record and explained how many different special needs populations and other populations were actually experimented on using these biologics. And African Americans have been one such group. There was an incident in Africa. Basically, scientists have been developing biologics that are effective at birth control. Now, if that was something you wanted, that would be one thing, informed consent. But there was a mass campaign in Africa in which millions were basically given this under the assumption that it was just a routine tetanus campaign.
Wow.
In fact, the tetanus toxin was conjugated to human chorionic gonadotropin, which is the pregnancy hormone, having the effect that if you got this, your body would make antibodies to that hormone and you would not be able to sustain a pregnancy. Right? They were not informed. Obviously, in Africa, most of them, almost all of them were African. And it took some Catholic charities to actually take samples and have them analyzed. And half of the samples showed that they had the human chorionic gonadotropin in it. And you can see the science of them making these biologics, which is fine. It's just that not having informed consent and giving them is the problem. And so we know it's possible, and it looks like that's what was done. And so I'm not going to say, it needs to be something that's investigated, brought to court or whatever, but it never has been. So this tells you what can be done. And, they're saying in Japan, a bunch of vials were recalled and things like this. And so that begs the question, how do we even know if what's being injected into us is what we think it is?
Right.
And so I think that, when you're talking about forcing something, it's very problematic. And so, of course, that's why African Americans are and should be questioning. And the other thing that really is concerning to me is we live in an age where we have the information, the genetic code, the epigenetics, to base our medical care on unique, to make it very unique and to that person. I'm learning more and more about how people of African descent have specific genetic differences and epigenetic differences that allowed them to adapt to the environment that they were in and be successful in it. However, they make them more sensitive to things like RNA viruses, like the one that's going around, as well as to certain biologics that induce an immune response that's very different than one that is seen in their European counterparts. And so this is a science. We also know that they have mutations that are protective from malaria that make it more likely that upon such a stressor, such as a biologic or even a virus itself, that they could go into something called crisis where their red blood cells blow up. This is something that doctors should be screening for, should be addressing, should have blood transfusions right and ready for these patients, and should be monitoring those as high risk going in, knowing that this is a potentiality for that patient. So this individualized medicine that we need to have is being ignored in lieu of a political narrative that if we're just nicer to people, that's the way to treat. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be nicer to people. That's the one.
Right.
But I want the hard science. When you're treating me, I want you to be doing these tests and individualizing your medicine for me instead of this one size fits all that's going on.